Imagine this. You've made mistakes, ruined relationships, tanked your career, buried in debt. But instead of facing the fallout, you walk into a clinic, lie down, and reboot. Your face. Changed. Your past. Gone. Your identity. Wiped clean. You walk out as someone else, smarter, stronger, untouched by regret. A total reset of body, mind, and history. No consequences, no accountability, just freedom. But what happens when everyone starts doing it? In this world, a technological marvel known as ReGenesis has changed everything. Originally developed to help PTSD victims and trauma survivors, the procedure quickly evolved. It now offers total life resets, memories edited or deleted, physical traits restructured, even social records revised. At first, it was hailed as a miracle, a second chance for the broken, the abused, the lost. But like any tool of power, it was never going to stay noble for long. Soon, celebrities rebooted to escape scandals. Criminals disappeared into new lives. Ordinary people erased debts, heartbreak, shame. Why suffer through consequences when you could just start over? But with each reboot, society began to unravel. Relationships became temporary. Promises meant nothing. Who you were mattered less than who you were right now. And when identity becomes disposable, so does meaning. In this new reality, permanence is a curse. Commitment is outdated. And morality, just a relic of a world that no longer exists. But it all began with one breakthrough, the invention that shattered the final boundary between memory, morality, and the self. It started as a clinical innovation designed not for escape, but for healing. The original version of ReGenesis was created by a neuropsychology lab in Zurich, working on treatments for soldiers with treatment-resistant PTSD. Their goal was modest: target and delete specific trauma-linked memories using precision neuromapping, paired with regenerative hormone therapy that rewired cognitive pathways. But early trials showed something far more powerful. Subjects weren't just forgetting trauma, they were becoming new people. Their fears disappeared. Their habits changed. Their personalities shifted. The brain, it turned out, was far more reprogrammable than anyone imagined. Once memory and behavior were no longer chained to experience, everything else became flexible. Preferences, instincts, identity itself. Within a decade, the treatment evolved from trauma relief into full-blown life reboots. The procedure became widely available through certified clinics. At first, only the ultra-wealthy could afford it. Then government subsidies kicked in. Then consumer-grade packages launched. Within a generation, anyone could walk into a center, select a custom profile, and reboot. You could keep certain skills and memories, your education, your language fluency, your motor coordination, but delete the emotional baggage tied to them. Or you could go clean slate, start from zero, and build a new you from scratch. You could also customize appearance, not just cosmetic surgery, but full genetic realignment. Want a new face, a different gender expression, a taller frame, altered vocal tone? All included. To some, this was freedom incarnate. To others, it was the death of authenticity. But no matter how people felt, the demand skyrocketed. Insurance companies even began offering reboot coverage as a form of mental health maintenance. Therapists adapted. Whole industries emerged: reboot consultants, identity brokers, aftercare navigators. Society didn't stop to ask, should we? It just asked, how fast can we? But the ones who moved fastest weren't the broken or the noble. They were the ones with something to hide. It didn't take long for the reboot clinics to attract attention from society's shadow corners. The first wave of unofficial adopters weren't patients, they were fugitives. White-collar criminals, hackers, political exiles. People who needed to disappear. ReGenesis offered a solution no plastic surgeon or passport forger ever could: complete identity erasure. Criminal records, facial recognition, even biometric signatures, all rendered useless after a deep reboot. And it didn't stop there. Burned-out executives wiped away their stress-induced breakdowns and came back as carefree artists. Influencers rebooted into anonymous nobodies, finally escaping the crushing weight of fame. Runaways became scientists. Addicts became athletes. The past no longer haunted anyone because it simply didn't exist. It was intoxicating. The media painted these early cases as feel-good stories of reinvention. But behind the scenes, governments grew nervous. Because the truth was, they couldn't track anyone anymore. A black market soon followed. Underground reboot clinics popped up across the globe, unregulated, untraceable, and brutally effective. No documentation, no oversight. Questions asked. Entire identities were burned and rebuilt overnight. You could buy a new life the way you'd buy a car. Some customers rebooted monthly, addicted to the thrill of constant reinvention. Others used it once to disappear forever. Society adjusted quickly. Dating apps added reboot disclosure options. Employers began requiring continuity verifications. But enforcement was nearly impossible. No one knew who was real anymore. The line between truth and persona blurred, and most people preferred it that way. Because if you could erase guilt, shame, failure, why wouldn't you? But freedom has a cost, and as more people rebooted, the foundation of human connection began to crumble. When life is rebootable, nothing stays sacred. At first, it was subtle, a rising divorce rate. Ghosting in relationships became not just normal, but obsolete. Why ghost someone when you could just reboot and never remember they existed? Marriages ended overnight. One partner would wake up to find the other had walked into a clinic and erased the entire relationship. Memories gone. Affection erased. No fight, no closure. Just deletion. Parenthood became optional. People rebooted to forget children they couldn't handle. Some chose to try again from scratch after tragic losses, keeping the baby, erasing the grief. Others simply opted out of responsibility. Employers found their teams unstable. Workers would vanish mid-project, return as different people, often with no memory of their job. Loyalty collapsed. Training cycles became endless. Contracts were rewritten to include memory anchor clauses, binding people to specific terms of service even through resets. But enforcement was near impossible. Religious institutions fractured. Some declared rebooting a spiritual death. Others embraced it as a form of rebirth. Philosophers debated whether the you after a reboot was still you at all. Meanwhile, most people didn't care. They were too busy starting over. And something else changed, something harder to measure: empathy. When everyone has the option to erase pain, fewer people learn how to sit with it. Without consequences, there's no growth. Without scars, there's no wisdom. The world began filling with people who had no memory of heartbreak, betrayal, sacrifice. They made decisions in a vacuum of meaning. Relationships became shallow. Bonds became temporary. Even friendships felt fragile, because at any moment, someone could decide they didn't like who they were and just vanish. And yet, for some, this wasn't just a way out. It became a weapon. In a world where you can be anyone, the real question becomes, who are you now? Over time, the collective self began to dissolve. With every reboot, more people lost track of their personal histories. Memories were fragmented. Entire lifetimes became loose timelines. Some individuals had been 10 different people by age 30, with no emotional tether to any of them. Society adapted with disturbing speed. New terminology emerged. Versioning became a casual part of conversation. Oh, I'm dating Alex, 3.2, not the one from last year. Social networks added version logs. People listed their prior names and roles like old usernames, not because they were proud, but because no one remembered anything. In some cities, continuity counselors were hired to help people piece together fragments of past versions. Hospitals maintained lifelogs, private databases that let rebooted individuals opt in to their old health records. Some kept backup memories stored offline, locked behind biometric keys. Memories they could choose to restore or never open again. But the psychological effects were severe. Some rebooted so often they developed temporal displacement syndrome, a condition where the mind glitches between identities, unable to determine what's real. Others formed reboot cults, encouraging endless cycles of rebirth to escape karma or transcend the self. One group even claimed they could remember all of their past selves, treating each reboot like reincarnation with full awareness. Governments attempted regulation. But how do you police identity when the very concept of self is now fluid? Crimes were committed by people who no longer existed. Testimonies became unreliable. Even consent was legally murky. Was a yes from version 2.0 still valid for version 6.1? And then came the blackouts. A growing number of people began losing chunks of time, days, weeks, sometimes years, belonging to versions they didn't choose to forget. The line between self-deletion and identity collapse blurred. The reboot system had promised freedom, but what it delivered was fragmentation, a world of people who remembered everything except who they were. And while identity crumbled, powerful forces found a way to profit from the chaos. Once rebooting became normalized, the world's oldest instincts kicked in: control, power, profit. The reboot clinics had started as healing centers, but soon they became tools of manipulation. Weaponized by those who saw the ultimate opportunity, a market for identity itself. Private corporations bought up exclusive rights to reboot software updates, custom emotional templates, skill bundles, even memory curation packages became subscription services. People could now pay monthly to remember only what they wanted, an optimized version of self, managed like a smartphone. But the darkest corners of the reboot economy weren't run by companies. They were run by criminals. Trafficking rings began forcibly rebooting victims, erasing their pasts, deleting their languages, and selling them as docile blank slates. People who once had families, dreams, entire lives reduced to programmable shells with no legal identity and no memory of who they were. And because they no longer matched any biometric record, they were untraceable. Governments took notice, but only when they, too, found rebooting useful. In authoritarian states, whistleblowers were rebooted against their will. Political prisoners didn't disappear anymore. They were remade. Their memories scrubbed, personalities rewritten, turned into loyal workers or silent nobodies. It was cleaner than execution and quieter than imprisonment. And the public? They barely noticed. Because on the surface, everything still looked normal. People went to work, posted filtered selfies, lived curated lives. But beneath it all was a growing unease. Every interaction carried an invisible question. Has this person rebooted? Are they who they say they are? Were they someone else yesterday? Trust became a luxury, authenticity a myth. Even love, the last supposed anchor of humanity, was corrupted. Some couples rebooted together to erase bad memories, romantic at first, until one partner quietly rebooted alone and deleted the relationship. Some people fell in love with the same person multiple times, unaware they were repeating a loop crafted by code. There were also reports, unconfirmed but persistent, of custom-built personalities being implanted into rebooted individuals. Spouses paying to make their partners more compliant. Parents rebooting children to fix behaviors. Governments programming ideal citizens. The line between freedom and puppetry dissolved. And through it all, a chilling realization began to take root. When memory is for sale, humanity itself becomes a commodity. But the real collapse didn't come from exploitation. It came from the question no one could answer. If we can reboot, are we still us? The technology gave people new lives. But it also stole something more important: the soul of continuity. Across the world, courts struggled with identity-based lawsuits. If someone committed a crime, then rebooted and no longer remembered it, were they still guilty? Could a person be held accountable for the actions of a self they no longer were? One high-profile case saw a man convicted of corporate espionage. Before trial, he rebooted, erasing all memories of his actions. His legal team argued that the man in front of the jury was not the same entity that committed the crime. "You're prosecuting a ghost," they claimed, and the jury believed it. But that case opened the floodgates. Insurance companies voided coverage for rebooted clients, citing identity discontinuity. Marriages fell apart when spouses rebooted and fell out of love. Families sued reboot clinics for wrongful deletion of memories. People tried to reconnect with loved ones who now looked at them like strangers. And at the center of it all was the question no one could answer: what makes you, you? If your experiences shape your identity, and you erase those experiences, are you still the same person, or just a shell? Does continuity define the soul? Or is the soul just a collection of data points strung across time? Religion fractured even further. Some said rebooting was the murder of the self. Others claimed it was no different than baptism, just higher tech. A few argued that each reboot created a new soul entirely, making each person spiritually accountable to different lifelines. Mental health professionals sounded the alarm. They began to observe post-reboot identity dissonance, a psychological condition where rebooted individuals felt detached from their own lives. They experienced vivid dreams from other versions of themselves, phantom emotions with no cause, and spontaneous breakdowns triggered by stimuli they couldn't remember ever experiencing. Even reboot addicts, those who used the procedure for pleasure, began to suffer. The rush of newness wore off. Without a consistent self to return to, many began to unravel. And still, people kept rebooting. Because the truth was terrifying. Permanence had become a prison, and rebooting, for all its flaws, had become the only escape. But while most of the world embraced this endless evolution, a quiet resistance formed, a movement built on the radical idea of never starting over. They were labeled extremists at first, anachronisms clinging to a broken world. They called themselves permanence. They refused to reboot, not because they couldn't afford it, not because they didn't qualify, but because they believed that identity, pain, memory, and even regret were sacred. Some were old souls, artists, therapists, monks, people who believed meaning could only come through endurance. Others were born into families of reboot survivors and grew up resenting how fragmented their parents were. One young woman described her childhood as growing up with 5 different mothers, all in the same body. As rebooting became more common, permanents became symbols of resistance. They wore their trauma with pride, shared their life stories in full, unedited detail, refused memory curation, emotional suppression, or appearance modifications. They weren't against change, were against erasure. Subcultures bloomed around them. Underground art collectives, physical storytelling gatherings, even non-digital journals, where your handwriting, not your history, told your truth. In some places, permanent communities began creating entire economies that rejected reboot commerce. No version logs, no memory edits, no masks. At first, society dismissed them. Then it mocked them. But something strange happened. People started listening. Because permanence remembered. They remembered how it felt to lose someone and carry that grief instead of deleting it. They remembered how shame could fuel transformation, how regret could lead to growth. They were raw, imperfect, but whole. Governments saw them as liabilities, walking reminders of everything the reboot industry tried to erase. Corporations hated them, unprofitable, unpredictable, immune to identity branding. But permanents didn't want to fight. They wanted to witness. They bore the weight of continuity, not as punishment, but as proof that the self is not something to be optimized or cleansed, but lived through failure, heartbreak, scars, and time. In a world that had forgotten how to be itself, they were memory incarnate. And as the divide grew between the rebooted and the remembered, one question echoed across generations. If everything can be reset, does anything still matter? In the beginning, rebooting felt like freedom. The ability to erase failure, to forget heartbreak, to outrun consequence. But what we gained in control, we lost in meaning. Because when nothing lasts, when every emotion, every relationship, every identity can be rewritten at will, then what is real? When there's no past to learn from, no story to follow, no thread tying oneself to the next, are we even human anymore? We built a world free of scars, and in doing so, we forgot why we needed them. Not all pain is poison. Not all memories are burdens. Some are anchors. Some are the very reason we know who we are. So here's the question you'll have to answer for yourself. If you could reboot your life right now, would you? And more importantly, should you? If this video made you think differently, even for a moment, hit that like button. Subscribe for more explorations into the unseen futures we're building every day. And drop your thoughts in the comments. Would you reboot yourself if you had the chance? Or would you carry your past into tomorrow? Scars, regrets, and all. New videos weekly. New worlds every time. Don't just watch the future. Question it.